Oh, there we go. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming along. Given that this meeting is being held online, we're all in different places, but no matter where we are during this meeting, we're all on Aboriginal land. Right now, I'm in Richmond and I'm sitting on Darug land. I'm so thankful that I'm able to live, that I'm able to work, that I'm able to learn, and that I'm able to explore, and that I'm able to raise my children on this land, which was cared for thousands of years before me by the Darug people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. My name is Charlotte, and I'm the Sustainability Officer at Council. I'm about to pass you over to Joe, who is the presenter this evening. Joe is a Sydney-based sustainability educator and speaker with experience in health sectors, in environmental compliance and behaviour change. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, you can use the raised hand function on your Zoom, or you can type them into the chat and we'll try and answer them throughout the workshop or at the end. And just so you know, this session is being recorded. So if you have any issues with that, you can turn your camera off and just listen, but it's just being recorded so that we can share it with anyone who wanted to be a part of it but couldn't attend it in person. So I'll pass you over to Joe now.
Thank you, and thanks Charlotte, and welcome everyone. My name is Jo, and welcome to this evening's workshop, which is about plastic-free living. If there really is such a thing these days, it's an ambitious assumption, but we are talking, I guess, about some of those problematic plastics tonight, those single-use plastics in particular, and what we can do to, if not phase them out of our lives, what is going to be phased out of our lives in the next little while. There's some quite significant legislative changes coming, so we will talk about those. We had a session last week for businesses, so we talked about the impact of businesses and organisations. So if you work for an organisation that this may impact, there'll be some information there for you as well. If you volunteer or are involved in any other community fundraising, charitable organisations, sporting clubs, there will also be implications for you when you put that hat on too. So thanks for sharing your evening. We will be 1 hour and there will be lots of opportunities for questions, comments, ideas, and sharing anything that you think is helpful as well. As Charlotte mentioned, my job is to talk about this stuff as my work. I work with communities all over Australia doing exactly this, talking about the sorts of, I guess, fairly low importance activities that make up a big impact when we all think about our cumulative consumptions, our cumulative behaviours. So I think it's really important to talk about the unimportant sometimes, not because it is on everyone's radar, but for exactly that reason. It's not on everyone's radar all the time, but it is important, particularly after the last couple of years we've had, to really focus our attention on what we can do and take control back when it comes to things like single-use plastics. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about plastics. As I said, there's some key parts to ask questions. We're going to talk about the legislation. I'm actually going to talk about the psychology of behaviour change and what's involved when we're actually looking at our own behaviours and what other people are asking of us, or maybe what we're asking of them. And then how we can really work together and what sort of resources and things are out there to help us. So if you're feeling like you want to share anything about yourself tonight, just to help us bridge some of that digital divide, by all means, say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're from, either suburb or area, or maybe an organisation. And then while you're here, you know, what is it that you're really hoping to tap into? Is it that you're wanting to know about the single-use plastic bans? Is it that you're wanting a little bit of inspiration to get started again? Is it just that you wanted to get out of cooking dinner tonight? And if that's the case, then that's okay, because I can relate to that too. So I'd love to hear a little bit. It certainly helps me get to know the community a little better. As you can imagine, I get to speak to lots of people, but also not speak to anyone quite often. So anything you can share tonight is appreciated. If you don't know how to use the chat function or you know, the hands up function, you can also just turn your microphone on if you've got a burning question and you really want to ask it. So please be as involved as you feel comfortable with today. So we know a lot about this thing called plastics. We talk a lot about it in the world today. We know that it is absolutely embedded in every part of modern living. It's fundamentally something that we have, I guess, some control, but also often feels like very little control over in our daily lives. If you wish to shop at a supermarket, to buy anything that is clothes, if you want to go to a healthcare facility, if you want to indeed just be a citizen of the world, plastics are absolutely part of our life. There are very few people who live plastic free, and they have to do it incredibly intentionally. It is almost a revolutionary act to live plastic free these days. There are people who do try in every sense, but we know that it is fundamentally very hard to do. So we know that our consumption of plastics is actually incredibly high in Australia, particularly with single-use plastics. Most of it goes straight to landfill. Very little of our plastics are actually recycled, partly because a lot of the plastics we use are very unrecyclable. The sorts of plastics that are highly recyclable, like our milk bottles and our drink bottles, are not the sort of plastics that that are, you know, some of them go to landfill, but a lot of the other sorts of plastics, our soft plastics, our single-use plastics, and a lot of the hybrid composite plastics don't really have an end market. So why would anyone invest in collecting, storing, and trying to get a volume of something that's incredibly lightweight and try and recycle it? And at the end of the day, should we even be recycling these things? Because ultimately they are incredibly problematic. We know that they have a huge impact on our waterways, our oceans, our beaches, our livestock, particularly if we get into our soil. We know that these things are not things that will just kind of go away. They're with us for the rest of our lives and many, many, many generations to come. So we know that plastic use is almost doubling. You know, we have the supermarket is basically wall-to-wall plastics. Even the things that look like cardboard are often a plastic cardboard composite. So why is that a problem? Apart from the fact that we've talked about the fact that we will have potentially more plastic than fish in the sea, it's also a climate problem. Plastics come from fossil fuels. They are extracted and transported, and every stage of the production have emissions related to them. Maybe not to the scale of other fossil fuel in terms of energy use, but certainly they're not a renewable resource. They're not a clean and an industry that really holds a lot of environmental credentials. Not to mention the fact that, you know, the actual mechanics of taking something, extracting it, making it, using it for less than 7 minutes or something, and then throwing it in the bin or into landfill for the next 100,000 years, whatever that time frame is, doesn't make a lot of sense. So we have this situation where we've created this, I guess, bit of a problem for ourselves. And we're now at this point in time where most modern first world countries are kind of going, we have to undo this somehow. So what you're starting to see now is this repealing or this transitioning away from these types of problematic plastics. Not all plastics, I think we've got a long way before that happens, but we've come some way. We know that since 2018, when we first saw the War on Waste series on ABC, it kind of reached this peak of public interest and sentiment that perhaps we have this immense issue when it comes to consumption, not just of plastics, but of all things, clothes, you know, that we have this huge issue with recycling, that we have this huge reliance on buying new when we should be reusing or creating industries for recycling. So we have come some way, I think, in Australia. I've worked in this space for about 6 years, and I believe that in that time, there's been an incredible transition when it comes to things like container deposit schemes. You know, we have seen actually a reduction in litter in that period of time. We have seen reuse discussed a lot more, but we have some pretty epic problems, and just a tip of the iceberg really when it comes to plastics and fixing this. So this is the head of the United Nations Environment Programme, Inga Anderson, and she in March announced that basically all nations of the earth have reached a critical point where plastic pollution is an epidemic, that it's a problem that we need to look at. So, you know, there's about 7 billion of the 9.2 billion tons of plastic have ended up in landfills. And we know landfills don't have a lot of room. We are the ones that pay for landfills to be managed. And we know in Australia, we are running out of room in landfills too. So we know that plastic causes huge health issues, not just for ourselves, but for our ecosystems. And so she said that basically we've reached a point where we can't keep going. And she said the biggest driver of this change and this push for what will become a global treaty on plastic pollution is public impatience. She said that we've reached a point where we cannot continue to do what we have done in the last 30 to 40 years, and particularly in the last 10 to 20. We cannot continue to move at the scale that we are, because we will just drown in this stuff. And so they are saying that by 2024, so in 2 years' time, we will have a global treaty signed by the nations of the earth in the same way that the Paris Climate Accord reached a global treaty for emissions reduction. So it is a start. It will mean that the nations who can pull their weight can and should, and that other nations of the world will be supported as well. What that looks like, we don't know yet, but it will be about plastic production. It will be about targets. It will be about reduction, and it will be about processing and collection of the fact that we've already got this stuff out there, and what are we going to do with it? So it may be that, you know, certain plastics no longer can be created globally, or that we have to use a certain amount of recycled content always, or that in fact virgin plastic is banned globally. Who knows? We don't know what that looks like yet, but we've reached a tipping point, I guess. So I will say that in all things, that plastic is one of those tricky items when it comes to the waste hierarchy, because the further you move down the process of using it, really there's very few alternatives for it. It's not readily recycled. It does not compost, and anyone who tells you it degrades or biodegrades, even the compostable types of plastics, can still be very problematic. So really the only alternative once you've used a plastic item is for it to eventually end in landfill. And even if it is recycled for a few cycles, eventually plastic degrades to a point that it is no longer infinitely recyclable. So it doesn't have an infinite life. So one of the best things you can do when it comes to plastic use is to actually avoid or remove it. If you can avoid it in the first place, you are saving so many problems further down the line. Reuse is fine, but we know that, again, a lot of the items that we're talking about were not designed for reuse. They're simply not fit for purpose for reuse. You wash it, it doesn't wash well. It doesn't feel clean after you've used it. How do you clean a plastic bag infinitely? It's not a product that was designed for ongoing use. So therefore, reuse is not an ideal scenario for these items. It's good to prioritize a reusable over it to avoid it being needed in the first place. And obviously substitution there becomes useful. So make sure that when you're coming to these things that you're starting to think about where this item will end up. And that's what the problem with plastic is, that it really doesn't have a lot of amazing pathways at scale. Maybe in small areas we can make a difference, but when it comes to the volume of what we have, there's very few viable alternatives for the volume that we create. I'm loving that Laura's here and she's saying she's love being plastic free, but there's so many areas that she's keen to hear about where the changes are and how it could seep into mainstream. Excellent. So Laura is one of those amazing humans who are probably making us all feel incredibly inspired / ashamed, because she's probably transitioned a lot of these things out of her life, which is wonderful to see. And it's great to see people doing that. I certainly know more and more people. And look, we'll probably have our own varying levels of what plastic free looks like for us. I've certainly started this journey myself some time ago and have made a lot of changes, but not as many as I'd probably like. And I know how hard it is to do that. So I do want to talk briefly. It's hard to speak briefly about legislation and make it meaningful, but I am going to do my best. The one I'm going to spend time talking about today is the New South Wales plastics ban, because it's the one that has the most relevance to you. But if you are interested in what's happening at a national or state level around all these things, there's some really good information on all of these acts here, and all of the strategies and approaches. And all you need to know is that governments are moving on this, but they're probably not moving at the speed of which communities would like them to. As is often the case. We know that the single-use plastic bag ban, the lightweight ban, started on the 1st of June. I'd love to know how many of you have still seen lightweight plastic bags out in your community. I've counted 5 stores now that have still been issuing them. So we have a bit of an issue, but from the 1st of June, lightweight plastic bags are actually illegal in New South Wales. That we shouldn't be able to receive them. And if you're a store, you shouldn't be handing them out, even if you still have stockpile of them or whatever other reasons you might come up with. So, so lightweight plastic bags have been banned. And from the 1st of November, you'll see a few other items being banned as well. Now, throughout these, the QR codes have the links for what I'm talking about. So if you want some more information, you can just scan those or take a photo. I will also be providing these slides through as a handout, so hopefully you'll be able to access anything if you wish to get more information. This website is actually really fantastic. The Department of Planning and Environment's website for this. It goes through it in fairly common sense, easy to understand language. So it's better than some other legislation. So from the 1st of June, we would have already seen plastic bags, even if they're made out of compostable bioplastic or certified compostable bags, should not be handed out from stores. So lightweight is a 35 micron or less bag. So generally they're white, really light, and not the Coles, Woolies or IGA bags that you see, the thicker ones. That is for another conversation, whether they're actually any better, but we know that they're the ones that you generally get takeaway food. You might be getting items from the chemist. You tend to see them at those sorts of locations. The ban doesn't apply to barrier bags, so bin bags, dog waste bags, produce bags. So in the supermarket, when you get, if you put your apples in a bag, you will still be able to do that, although, maybe think about not doing that. And it doesn't mean medical items as well, bags that are transported by medical. So again, the idea is that this is to try and phase out those lightweight plastic bags, which we know are some of the biggest contaminators and most heavily littered items. They're also the items that tend to turn up in our recycling most readily too. So please never put your recyclables in plastic bags and put them in the bin. They should be loose and free, and you shouldn't be putting them in your yellow bin ever. These lightweight plastic bags can go back to RedCycle. So by all means, you can collect those if you wanted to bag those up. But these are something that basically even the government think that we should be phasing out. There are other alternatives. You will see paper bags, like when you get Uber Eats, it will be in a paper bag. Most stores will have a paper bag alternative, or you should be encouraged to bring your own bags. We've got pretty good at remembering our canvas bags or our green bags now. So, you know, it's great to try and remember that. And if you do use the better bags or the smart bags or whatever they call them, those thicker plastic bags, please reuse them. Don't treat them like bin liners or others. They've been designed to try and be a little better and lighter on the planet, even though technically they're still plastic bags. So the other things we'll see from the 1st of November are plastic cutlery and straws. So most businesses and most cafes and even at McDonald's and you know, Boost Juice have phased out plastic straws. You'll still see them at a lot of, like, with slushies and you know, just the occasional takeaway place that'll still have black plastic straws particularly. We know that McDonald's were the biggest offenders when it came to straws. So it's been great that they've transitioned to paper straws. Everyone hates paper straws. I've never met anyone who goes, gee, I love paper straws. But that's not the point. I think a lot of people have realized that straws really, unless you require them for assistance with, you know, drinking, then why do we need them? They're a very redundant item when it comes to our modern day life. So we won't be able to supply or use plastic straws unless you have additional needs which you know, are medical or based on a disability that require that, and you will be able to access those by simply asking. So they have liaised extensively with particular sectors and spoken to people about this, because this was probably the biggest concern. You will still be able to get them, but you know, the other 90% of people or whatever won't be able to use them freely. And I think we've already pretty much jumped that behavior, and we've got pretty okay with plastic straws being out of our lives. So white plastic cutlery, which is the stuff we mostly see, will also be phased out, as well, as will stirrers and other little plastic paraphernalia that comes through toothpicks or blades, or and that goes for even the biodegradable options as well. So just because it says compostable on the back or biodegradable, you have to think about what that really means, and we'll talk about it in a sec. But it's really not a great alternative. It still doesn't break down in ocean environments. It's still heavily littered. And to be honest, it's ending up in landfill and not breaking down anyway, or it's acting as a contaminant in recycling. So biodegradable items, you know, whilst they're not made from fossil fuels, are still problematic. And it's really not a great solution. And that this legislation reflects that. It doesn't apply to serving tongs, and yeah, you'll certainly, as I said, still be able to access straws if you require them for additional needs. So the other thing, single-use bowls and plates. So those plastic plates you used to see at barbecues, you won't be able to buy them at supermarkets, retail. You won't receive them. So if you run somewhere that regularly provides barbecues, you need to be looking at alternatives. Most of the alternatives are paper or cardboard, but yeah, you won't be able to buy plastic plates in the way that we used to. It doesn't apply to takeaway containers that are required for soups or heavy liquid items. So if you are someone who routinely gets takeaway food that has, you know, like Thai food or Chinese takeaway, and it comes in a plastic container that stops it either leaking out or spilling, those containers are likely still going to be okay. It's really those plates and bowls that there isn't an adequate alternative for. And this is what the legislation is trying to reflect, is that where there's a good alternative, they will encourage that to be used. Where there is an alternative that maybe is as questionable in terms of environmental impact, they will continue to allow the plastic alternative. So again, not a huge transition there, but it will be good to see that those plates that we often see at barbecues used for literally a second for a kid's birthday cake and then thrown in the bin will have to be a paper or other alternative. Expanded polystyrene, how we still use this stuff, I have no idea, but those horrible clamshell things that you get your fish and chips or your kebab in, they will go finally. Polystyrene, if you look up the impacts of polystyrene on human health and the environment, it's really toxic stuff. We don't want this. This has no place in our world. So it's great to see that this is being phased out. You will still see polystyrene in your meat trays or your mushroom trays potentially, although there are some transitions there. And, you know, if you get ramen noodles with those cups that are, you can still get that sort of stuff, but you won't see polystyrene takeaway containers used like they once were. Now, this applies obviously to businesses, to retailers, takeaway shops. It also applies for anyone running any activity, for community groups, not-for-profits, charities, canteens, barbecues. You can't sell these, manufacture them, supply them. So hopefully we will see all of them out of our stores, out of our choices. Plastics and packaging companies won't be selling them in their catalogues. They're gone. So from the 1st of November, if you're sitting there and you know that your local soccer club has 2,000 cups of polystyrene or, you know, plastic plates, that it's time to use them up, because from the 1st of November, they won't be saying, oh, okay, you've got 100 left, you can keep using them. This ban doesn't include coffee cups. So, you know, you'll still be able to get paper cups with the plastic lining inside it, your normal takeaway plastic cup. Again, because they don't know what the alternative is in terms of mainstream scale, beyond the biodegradable alternative, which again, they were like, is it really working? There are some 100% home compostable versions coming through, but again, we haven't reached that point where they believe that the alternative is that much better at scale. So for now, it will stay. There is enough to say that there will be some more things considered. And the other thing that will be changed is the plastic, the microbeads as well. So plastic microbeads won't be allowed in products as well. You might be thinking, okay, that's fine. So most of those are not going to really make a huge alternative or change for me, because there are other alternatives. Obviously, I can use my paper plates and my little wooden cutlery and my paper straws. And a lot of people do ask the question about, well, compostable items, surely they're better. Surely we can just do that. We can spend a bit more on our biopack products or other alternatives. And hopefully I've covered it a little bit in saying that when you're weighing up the sustainability of options, that really it needs to stack up in terms of thinking about where it's come from, where it's going to go, what impacts it has along the way. And these are the alternatives that we should be looking at. We should be prioritizing, in a perfect world, none of them. We should be using a glass and a ceramic mug and a ceramic plate, having your coffee in a venue, using metal cutlery. That's the ideal. If you do need to have a single use or a takeaway item, then it should be made from these items. It should be metal, or a metal straw, or a bamboo, a wooden cutlery, a paper or paper pulp product without plastic lining. It could be a wheatgrass straw or a paper straw. It should be reusable. It could be a bagasse or a sugarcane pulp. You'll know that type because it looks a little bit like a heavier duty, more rustic cardboard, but you will have seen that. Sometimes palm leaf bowls, you'll see them at festivals and events. It should be glass, or if it's a reusable bag, jute or cotton. They're the gold standard in terms of single-use items. Single-use plastics of any kind, degradable plastics or oxy-biodegradable, you'll see names like this, biodegradable or compostable plastics. Ultimately, if they behave like plastic in use, they behave like plastic in the environment, even if eventually they're a biodegradable alternative and they will break down eventually. The environments for which these things break down are not the ocean, are not on our streets of our communities. They don't break down readily and quickly enough that they won't cause issues. A PLA straw or a plant-based plastic straw is still going to get stuck up the nose of a turtle. And the turtle's not going to say, but it's PLA. We need to avoid items which behave like plastic. Otherwise, we're really not solving the problem. So, as I said, try and prioritize things that have good environmental credentials. If you are choosing something for your organization and it's a paper or cardboard, look for certification, that it's got FSA certification, that it's come from a reliable source that's not using old growth forests. But most of the products these days you get have a fairly good credentials when it comes to this sort of stuff. And it's not like you can't find alternatives. But I will say that we have come some way. We are seeing shifts, and I hope you're seeing these shifts too. These are the sorts of things you'll see out in the community. At Aldi, you'll start to see that plastic packaging in their punnets is now being phased out. You'll start to see at Woolies and Coles the same thing. They're starting to phase out plastic packaging for bulk multi-buy or bulk buy items. In fact, a lot of stores are already measuring their impact. Aldi's already reduced their plastics by about 25%. They've already committed, by just simply phasing out cotton buds. They've really reduced 400 million plastic cotton buds. So this was a commitment that they started 2 years ago before these changes, and you'll notice Woolies and Coles did the same thing. They made these commitments well before the legislation. So we're seeing it in places like Officeworks, where they've removed expanded polystyrene. If you order things from Amazon, you'll notice that it comes wrapped with paper. So I'm not saying any of these brands are perfect. I don't think that's but we've certainly seen a shift. IKEA have moved to different types of packaging around their products. They're still plastics, but we've seen a shift. You might have noticed sushi coming in cardboard containers with wooden cutlery. You'll still see tiny, little sushi fish and a whole bunch of the soy sauce fish, sorry. But big shifts for a lot of brands. A lot of brands not responded yet, but I think that we will see that this will be the norm. This will be what people expect. And as much as even brands like, even franchises like Sushi Hub have had pushback from some of their customers because they don't like that maybe their containers didn't last as long, or maybe I think that we will be a little bit forgiving as we kind of expect that this is what's required if we're going to do things differently. If anyone's got any questions about the legislation as I move through now, please let me know. But I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about my favorite thing, which is what is change and how does it happen? And if you are sitting here going, oh, all of this is good, but I'm not really sure what I can do more than I already am, or they're thinking, yeah, okay, this is the kick I needed to start getting back into maybe doing some of the things that I was pre-COVID, or maybe even taking a step further and looking at some of the other items outside just these basic single-use plastic items, which is often the first place we start when we are looking to make changes to plastic-free living. And I'm not going to sit here today and tell you how to phase out plastics in other areas of your life, but I will give you some resources and places to go if that's what you're feeling like you want to do. And it sometimes takes us a couple of conversations or something to propel us into change, and that's what I'm really interested in talking to you about. The first thing to know about change is that as human beings, we're incredibly interested in what other people are doing, what they're saying, how they're acting, and we watch people, even if we don't realize. It's a really interesting behavior to go to the shops and watch yourself watching others. We do it innately. We are some of the most hyper social beings on earth. We are more social than any other primate, we're actually completely reliant on those social systems. We behave in the same way that bees and ants behave in colonies. We rely on other people to the point that we are completely fascinated with how others are behaving. And it's a really amazing thing to observe of yourself, because what you do at the shops is influenced by what others are doing, and what others are doing at the shops is influenced by what you're doing. Even if you're busy, we behave as social beings and we don't want to be uncomfortable. So we are very interested in how others perceive us and what others are doing and how that meets the social norms. And I think that's incredibly useful to understand about ourselves. If you are trying to change and do something that is slightly different, you have to expect that it's going to feel uncomfortable, because we are very aware of what other people are doing, saying, and feeling about us. And that's just what makes us humans. It's also important to recognize that when change happens, that there are people who adopt change like that because they love it and they're really excited about the fact that they're the first, they did it, they're on board, how good is this? Especially when it's innovative change, when it's a new product or it's a new technology or it's a new system or it's a new way of getting involved. And then you'll have others who will sit back a little bit and watch. Then you'll have others who are like, oh, well, I don't know, I don't feel very, oh, I'll do it when I have to. And then you'll have others who actively hate change, so much so that they'll only do it when there's no other alternative. So I think it's worth understanding where you sit on that, how you respond to different types of social and innovation change. So are you one of those people when something new comes up, you're like, ooh, I like that idea. Yes, I'm there. Or are you someone who, if you can see that something has a positive potential, you'll give it a go because you want to support that change? It's important to recognize that there are those people who really want to do the right thing early and will do it every time because they know it's the right thing to do. And there are others who will do it when the sort of stars align. They remember this and that worked, and most people are kind of in that boat. So we're heavily impacted by other people, and we're heavily impacted by the amount of circumstances which place pressure on us to behave in a certain way at a certain time. But I will also say that change is one of those weird things that we often think it only happens when we've when we've actually done something different. So you might be sitting here thinking, oh, like Laura, I'd really like to do more at, when it comes to running an event. I'm having a barbecue for my 50th and I really would like to run it plastic free. That just seems like a lot of work. And you might be umming and ahhing about doing that. Or you might be someone who's wanted to get solar on their roof and you've been thinking about it and talking to people, but you've never actually done anything about it. Or maybe you want to quit sugar. You've decided you're going to, this is the year, you've been talking, you've read the book and you've spoken to some people and you really want to reduce the amount of sugar in your life. Most people think that the change only happens when they've done it. I got solar, I did it, I made the change. Or I organized that event, it went off, really well, how good am I? Or, we got rid of sugar, we've been doing it for about 6 years and how great are we? We made the change. What people don't realize is that change is this massive continuum that starts well before you even know it's starting. And so we need to recognize that change is happening for you right now as you absorb more information. You might not actually do anything different for 6 months. That doesn't mean change isn't happening. And I think that's a useful way to analyze society as well, is that change is happening all the time. There's many, many precious conversations. And I think we've seen it with the climate conversation in Australia. It takes a long time for things to normalize and become mainstream. And at Good for the Hood, we're very passionate about this sense that, mainstream change happens slowly and often tediously, but it happens often better locally as well, because we can happen at a lot better speed and we have a lot more control. But what I'll say for you is that you can only consciously make a change once you know there's a problem, or once you recognize that you want to do something different. And often it takes a lot of things to make us say, all right, we can't keep doing things the way we were. And so it's that light bulb moment of, oh, yeah, that's really crap, isn't it? But that doesn't mean we necessarily change either. We actually have to go through a process of really unpicking why something is a problem to a point that it actually makes sense to us on a personal level. Oh, I can see why that issue of plastic is actually going to impact me. Or, oh, I can see why maybe what I've done in the past is less than ideal. And then that's when we really start to see people learning more, picking up solutions, trying things, giving it a go. So this is based on a trans theoretical model of change. So this was the model that's used for when you look at people giving up addictions or giving up smoking or losing weight or, making behavior changes as a result of a health issue. It's the same sort of thing when we decide we want to give up single-use plastic. So I'm just going to run through a few things, and you might just want to have a think about where you sit on this. I want you to think about using a coffee cup. So if you are someone who regularly goes to a cafe, and you regularly get a coffee, think about how you get that. Are you someone that never uses a single-use cup? Are you someone who occasionally uses it? Are you someone who always gets a single-use cup because that's just the way it comes? Have a think about where you are. And if you are someone who's just starting this conversation, where do you sit? So you might think, well, I don't see the big deal. It's one cup. You might be sitting here. So little to no awareness that there's actually a problem with that. To be honest, for you, there are far bigger issues in the world. And I know a lot of people who are climate activists who still use takeaway cups because this, for them, ain't a problem. And so you can rationalize this. You can put it in a box however you like. It is not a problem. I will continue doing what I've always done. What works really well for people at this space is that kind of consciousness raising. If it's only one cup, well, here's only one cup multiplied by everyone who uses that cup every day, which is what War and Waste did. Filled trans full of single-use cups and said, this is the problem. Sometimes it's a visit to a recycling facility or a landfill facility, or it's a visit to a beautiful location that's been absolutely trashed. Maybe it's a visit to an event, a coffee event, where you see how many cups. It's something that happens that makes you go, oh, that's not great, is it? And you start to go, oh, I realize why this is actually a problem. So there's a level of discomfort that comes with this stage where you may still be using a cup every day in the same way, but you're slightly uncomfortable with that. It doesn't feel as good as it did before. It's really nice being oblivious about problems. I often wish that I didn't know about the climate crisis sometimes, because I'd be like, I just live this amazing life where I can pretend it's all wonderful. But once you're in this space where you feel like that problem, that's when you start to go, all right, sorry, I just jumped it. You're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, maybe even a bit guilty or a bit shameful. So once you've moved into that next stage, that's when you say, well, all right, if it's such a big problem, maybe I could try something. So you actually start moving yourself into looking at what other people are doing. That's social modeling again. What's Laura doing? How did she give up her, where does she go? Which cafe does she go to? What kind of cup have you got there? You might ask random people. You're actually actively looking for those social modeling situations. And then there's this massive leap that happens at some point. Maybe it happens after tonight's phone call. Maybe it happens, when you're next in your cafe and you're like, all right, I remember my cup. I'm going to do this. This is happening. And there's like a resolve that's made. This is the first day of the diet. This is the first day where you pick up the phone and you ring the installation people for your solar and you know it's happening. You are invested now. And this is what most people go, well, I'm making the change. Who knows how long the prior process for this is, but it's happening. And once you've done it, there's a level of competence and acceptance and like patting on the back that goes on. You actually start to look at how you can embed this as a behavior. If it went positively, if it didn't go so positively, you can easily slip back into something else. But you might sort of going, well, wasn't that bit of a drama? Maybe I could put this in the car. I could have two so that once I use one, you actually start working it in. And if you do this long enough, it's a habit. And once you've got a habit, it's like any habit, it's harder to break than before. Not saying it can't be broken though, because we know that it only takes certain scenarios or certain situations for us to slip. And if we slip enough times, or there's enough external pressures or social modeling or criticism for behaving in a certain way, we can actually be pushed back. So that's exactly what COVID did to us. For people who've been big advocates for reuse or phasing out single use, we were forced into a situation to accept single-use plastic again as a very important part of our lives that kept us safe. And we had a lot of businesses who were like, nope, not taking your stuff, or I'm not, and we wanted to support them. So we were almost forced into that perfect storm of getting rid of reuse for a period of time. So now this is the moment to say, all right, COVID is not finished, but it's better than it was. We are in a situation where we know it's safe enough to do these things again. How do we go back to looking at taking charge of some of those reasonably easy swaps that we can make? And that's where we are now. So I've got some questions there about school resources, and I'll definitely give you my thoughts there, Kira, in a sec. But I'm going to just run through a couple of other things that you may or may not be able to explore for your community. You've obviously got people on here like yourself, interested, passionate, maybe in this space, maybe not. We've had a couple of sessions with businesses around Bilpin, and last week we had quite a few businesses. There's an appetite in your community. So really my urge to all of you is to look at how you can use that momentum. How can you work with council? How can you work with business? And how can you work with each other to, I guess, help your local communities continue on this road where plastics and single-use plastics are sort of considered the old way. And this is how we do it here in the Hawkesbury now. So there's a couple of ways that we can do. First of all, if you are going to reuse, and that is something you decide to do as a customer or a consumer, make it easy for business. Please practice good cleanliness and hygiene. There's nothing more offensive to a business owner or more off-putting to a server than to receive your 2-day-old cup that is less than desirable. Also, they want you to have a good experience. They want you to enjoy the meal or the coffee you're making. They don't want it to be an unpleasant experience for you. And they don't wish to provide something that may or may not make you sick as well. They don't like generally giving doggy bags or doing things that they think is going to potentially cause you problems. So make it easier for them by practicing good hygiene, by looking at the size and shape of what you're bringing in. If it is a reusable, how does that work with their systems, particularly if they're very busy? Maybe you can label it and simplify it for them. This can go for schools as well. My son's daycare used to have a reusable bag for wet items and things. So, and there were ways of making it easier for them to do it, and ways of making it easier for them to make sure it got back to you as well. If you're wanting to talk to a business about something they're doing, if you notice that since the single-use ban, they're continuing to use plastic bags and you want to talk to them about it, do it in a positive way. Be helpful. There's nothing more offensive and potentially more damaging for their journey of change than going in and attacking someone. And I've seen it happen and backfire terribly. We're in this together, whether or not you think someone's doing the right thing or not, that we're there as their guide, as their social model, as their potential cheer squad. If you go in and cause a negative experience for someone, even if you're trying to do it for the greater good, it can really backfire and make it more difficult for your community or for a business. So speak to business owners at convenient times, do it in a way that's really positive and inclusive and helpful. Try to support them to do the right thing, as opposed to, hey, you should know better, you're doing the wrong thing, I'm going to report you. There are some pretty major fines from the EPA for the changes. I didn't mention that, but it's $11,000 for sole traders and up to $200,000 for larger operators. So it's not a small impact, but the EPA will generally issue a warning first. And to be honest, the way the uptake's been at the moment, I don't think it's been that widely adopted. So I anticipate that it will be softly for a while. But I've always believed that you make more friends, with kindness, and you shape more minds with kindness than you do with anger or, aggression or even being slightly pious and knowing better than them. I believe that you make more friends by being kind and supportive. If you're concerned about food regulations and taking donations of food or using reusable containers, these are the legislations that protect you. There's nothing to say you can't use reusable containers. But if a business does not wish to serve you in them, it's their right to do so. They can refuse service to anyone they like on the basis of that they don't wish to use your container. That's fine. But they can't be sued. And as long as the container is fit for service, they can, in theory, provide it to you. So if you want to provide this information to them to give them peace of mind, you might be able to do that as well. Some of the schemes that I love, and I don't see these widely adopted everywhere. Some communities really embrace them. But if you're someone that's really wanting to help your local takeaway shops to embrace trashless takeaway, as it's called here. There's this great website that you can go on. It's called byocontainers.org. That's the QR code. You can go and have a look at any business in your area that will accept containers. That can be for takeaway, for bulk foods, for refills, pet food, any of those sorts of things. You can list them on this website. So you can go on as you go to a new business and you find out, you can put them on there as well. So it's kind of like a way of finding places that will allow you to bring your own containers. We also obviously know about a lot of bulk food and the source and those sorts of places. That's their business model. So it makes sense for them. But there are other places that often we're like, oh, didn't know that they didn't mind that. So it's almost like your social license to do it. And it takes out a little bit of that awkwardness, because you know that they're already saying, yeah, we do that. That's part of our customers' experience. The long-standing responsible cafes have always been advocating for reuse. So you can go and have a look at what cafes will give you a discount. By giving you a discount, it's less about the discount, more about saying, yeah, we're okay with this. Well, yes. So if you're feeling awkward and uncomfortable and uncertain, then you can go in, check your local cafe and find out. There's all these other measures on there that they're now looking at as well. So maybe they're giving away coffee grounds, maybe they're using renewable energy. You can go and see what other things they're doing as well. So it's just another way of supporting businesses who are trying to do their part. I looked and there wasn't a lot of activity with this one, but this is another scheme that's been set up for it's particularly active, as you can see, around the inner city, Sydney and the inner west. But Replated is a subscription service for containers, and you can actually take your takeaway container in and swap it. And it's like a circular container system for takeaway. And there are lots of these sorts of schemes. There's lots of cup swap schemes. You might have used a, Green Caffeine or Husky Cup or Returner, which is a Return is a type of supermarket product that you can buy zero waste. You may have a business who decides to set up a container library where you get your reusable container from the lunchroom and you go to your cafe next and you fill that up and you bring it and you wash it, and then you've got it there to take away again. There's no end of what you can do. You can go the very low-key option of just setting up a mug library at your local cafe, or a bags library, or a swap scheme that you can have. That doesn't have to be fancy. Bring your own cup or use one of ours. Simple invitation to reuse. Now here's the resources I'd recommend. Definitely, if you haven't thought about it, you have 30 days of September, 3 more days before Plastic Free July starts. So this is a wonderful time to have a conversation about plastics in all areas of your life, from the single use all the way through to packaging and other items that you bring into your home. Look at, at the bakery, how you're going to, get plastic free produce for fresh fruit and veggies. So Plastic Free July do have some schools information there. Clean Up Australia actually has some information about schools as well. They've sort of got their step up program. And the other one would be, Kira, would be Cool Australia, which is curriculum-based resources aligned with different topical things. I'm talking everything from like Bluey to the latest movie that's come out, and they're all today to do with sustainability. So that's coolaustralia.org. So you could go through and search for single-use plastics, and they'd have lessons for early childhood, primary, secondary, all the way through, from curriculum materials to library resources. They've got a digital library of resources. Really, really good stuff. So between those 3, I'd suggest, but definitely check out Plastic Free July. It's a really great opportunity for students to talk about what they've got happening for them at the moment, and what plastics are coming up for them in their life. And if you are doing school programs or anything, I'd recommend always starting with a waste audit at your school. If you haven't already, it's such a really powerful way to show students what you collect in a day. Where's their waste coming from? What percentage is coming from food and plastics and recyclables, and then what can they do to come up with a solution to reduce that. Oh, beautiful. And there you go. Charlotte's got some great council resources as well. Absolutely. You've got people like Charlotte at council who are at your disposal too, who would love to connect and support organisations, individuals as well. So, they're always willing to help where they can as well. And I was just going to say, lastly, before I take any more questions, is that it might help you to come up with a little bit of a BYO buddy if you're starting this journey again, and you're someone who's like, oh, I can't remember my cup or my bag or my, or actually really want to start looking at reducing my plastic waste from my produce. Find someone to do it with. Do Plastic Free July together. It really makes the experience so much more enjoyable, because it is extra and it is harder than not. I'm sure Laura will give us some insights. It's not easy to do this. It seems like it should be easy, but it's extra. We have busy lives and a lot of pressures on us anyway. So to do this, it does take that extra. So you may as well make it as enjoyable as possible. I particularly love someone called Erin Rhodes, who's called the Rogue Ginger as well, and she makes it really accessible. She lives a reasonably plastic-free lifestyle in Melbourne, and I just find her approach incredibly inspiring, actually. So she has a book as well. If you're into that, I'm sure the library could get you to borrow. So I think it's called something like Waste Free Living. Anyway, you'll find it if you look up Erin Rhodes, RHODES. All right, that's mostly me. We've got a couple of questions here. Oh, local Ush, beautiful. We'd love to see that. If anyone's got anything else, I know I've kind of hit right on the time there, so people have probably got kids and life calling them. But I will just say, lastly, if you are concerned about COVID safety, there's nothing stopping you from continuing to reuse, but please just respect that not everyone's there yet. Still, people are feeling a bit uncomfortable, but there are ways you can set up drop zones, contactless pours, you know, that you can definitely make sure that you're showing the use of sanitizer. If you run an USH and you're worried about, you know, reuse in a space where there's lots of kids and lots of mouths, and think about, you know, that process of how you can eliminate some of those concerns throughout your system. Excellent. And then, yes, Laura's got a great tip there around TerraCycle programs for cleaning product and using cleaning products like Zero Co. Yeah, it's some pretty fabulous refill programs now, where you can, and it's happening at a lot of cosmetic companies too. So you'll start to see brands like the French one, is it L'Occitane, that are doing it as well, starting to use refillable pouches and just putting that back in the container. So it's not completely waste-free, but certainly it's there again, moves in the right direction. Excellent. Charlotte's got her email there. I think we're good. Thank you, everyone. I hope I've given you a little bit of information about the legislation, a little bit of information about change, and now some resources. And I hope you can cast your mind across where you're at right now in your own journey with change, your own embracing of the plastic-free changes, and think about a couple of things that maybe you can either get back to or step into, even if it's just for July, and set yourself a challenge. All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. So we'll send the recording and the slide handout out, and please get in touch with Charlotte if you've got more questions or ideas. Thanks, everyone.